We are holding in middle of Seif in the Margala Bepumei Tafshin Mem. In the last year, we learned that there are three general Avedas. There's the Aveda of Re'usa Daliba, which Re'usa Daliba is the Ava Atzmis, the natural and inherent love that Yidden have, which comes as a result that Yidden are considered Banim Lamakim, we are the Eivishter's children. Then there's the Aveda of Kabbalah Soul. Kabbalah Soul means that a Yid is ready to do the Ratzon of the Eivishter, just in order to fulfill Hashem's Ratzon, which this Aved, this attitude of Kabbalah Soul comes as a result of the fact that Yidden are considered Avadim, Yidden are the Eivishter's servants. And then there's the Aveda of fulfilling mitzvahs, Torah mitzvahs with Peil Mamish, doing the physical act of the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. Those are the three Avedas that we've been learning about in the previous year. And we learned in Sif Dalid that which one of these Avedas causes what we call Hamshachas Ha'atzmos, which one of these Avedas allows a Yid to become connected with Atzmos, with the very essence of the Eibishter. It is specifically the Aveda of Kiyum HaTorah Mitzvahs B'Peil Mamish, the actual fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. Being that Torah mitzvahs are the Ratzon Ha'atzmos, they are Hashem's Ratzon. Atzmos, the very essence of the Eibishter himself, desires the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. So therefore, when a Yid actually goes ahead and fulfills Torah mitzvahs B'Peil Mamish, that's how Yid comes in contact, that's how Yid connects himself and the world to Atzmos, the very essence of the Eibishter. If so, why is it necessary to have the Aveda of Kabbalah Soil and Re'us Daliba? Seemingly being that the only Aveda that actually connects us to Atzmos is the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, so that should be our focus. We should only speak about doing Torah mitzvahs with Peil Mamish. Who cares about a Yid's attitude? Who cares about the Yid's motive and drive in his fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs? Let's not talk about Re'us Daliba, not talk about Kabbalah Soil. The main thing we should be talking about is doing the mitzvahs with Peil Mamish. So says the Rebbe in Sif Dalid that although it's true that Hamshachas Ha'atzmos comes specifically through the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, however, there's something called that Hamshachas should be Begili, or Isgalus Ha'atzmos. That Hamshachas Ha'atzmos, this connection, this Hamshachas that a Yid has, this Hamshachas Ha'atzmos should be something that's Begali, something that's revealed and apparent in a Yid's life. Meaning to say, if a Yid fulfills the mitzvahs, he does the mitzvahs with Peil Mamish, but he does them because of his own interests. He doesn't fulfill the mitzvah because it's the Ratzon of Hashem. So although there's going to be the Hamshacha, although he's going to connect with Atzmos, but this Hamshachas Ha'atzmos is not going to be something that's apparent and revealed in the Yid's life. When is the Hamshachas Ha'atzmos going to be Begilui? When is the Yid going to be conscious and feel the fact that he's having a connection with Atzmos, with the very essence of the Eibishter? That is specifically when the Yid fulfills the mitzvah, not because of his own interest, not because of his own desire, but he fulfills the mitzvah because it's the Ratzon Ha'atzmos, because it's Hashem's Ratzon. When a Yid's attitude, when a Yid's approach to the fulfillment of mitzvahs is that the reason why he's doing the mitzvah is just because this is the Ratzon of the Eibishter, that's what allows for the Hamshachas Ha'atzmos to be begolui in the life of the Yid. So that's why, based on this, we understand why it's so important to fulfill mitzvahs with Peil. It's very important to fulfill the mitzvahs with Peil Mamish, because that's how we connect with the essence of the Eibishter. And we also understand why it's important for our approach, for our attitude to fulfilling Torah mitzvah should be that I'm doing the mitzvah like a servant. I'm doing the mitzvah because this is Hashem's Ratzon. And why is that so important? In order for the Hamshachas Ha'atzmos to be Begilui. Why is it important to have the Aveda of Re'us Daliba, the Ava Atzmis? Why is it important to have the Aveda of being a ben to the Eibishter? So based on what we've learned until now, it comes out that it's a little technical. Meaning to say, the Rebbe explains Sif Dalid, why do we need to have the Aveda of Re'us Daliba? So the Rebbe said, if a Yid is going to serve the Eibishter with an Ava Shal Pitam Ladas, if a Yid is going to serve the Eibishter with a love, that this love is generated by, the love is created by Seichel, so then when a Yid's going to do the mitzvahs, he's going to do the mitzvahs for his own interests. Because let's say, for example, a Yid was misbeinin, a Yid had to contemplate on the fact that the Eibishter, the godless of the Eibishter, a Yid understands the greatness of the Eibishter, and that's why he loves the Eibishter. So why is he going to do Torah mitzvahs? In order to have a connection with this great Eibishter. Being that a Yid was Mizbein, the Yid understands with his intellect how the Eibishter is the greatest thing, and therefore it's Roy, it's worthwhile connecting and having a connection with the Eibishter because he's so great. So why is the Yid going to do Torah mitzvahs? He's not going to do Torah mitzvahs with Kabbalah Soil. He's not going to do the mitzvahs just to fulfill the Ratzon of the Eibishter. He's going to do Torah mitzvahs in order that he should have a connection with the Eibishter. In order that there should be, in the Lashon of the Maimer, in order that there should be a Gilui Kus in Welt. So a Yid that his drive to fulfilling Torah mitzvahs is Avash Al-Pitam V'das is not going to come to Kabbalah Soil. However, a Yid that has Ru'us Deliba means that a Yid's not looking for his own gain. He's not looking for his own interests. Ru'us Deliba means that a Yid is a Ratzon and an Avad to the Eibishter just because Hashem is his father. He's not looking to gain something out of the relationship. He's not looking to make himself bigger or greater or get something, a personal interest out of this relationship. He's just a child connecting and yearning for his father. So says the Rebbe in the beginning of Seif Dalid that it is specifically the Aveda, the Ava, Rus the Liba, that allows a person to come to Kabbalah Sil. But again, it comes out that the Aveda Rus Liba doesn't have necessarily an intrinsic value. Meaning to say, the fulfillment of mitzvahs is extremely valuable. We know why it's valuable. The only way a Yid can connect to Atzmos is if he does Torah mitzvah Pel Mamish. So we understand why the fulfillment of mitzvahs has, so to speak, it has an intrinsic value. That's how the Eibishter set things up, that the only way to connect to him is through fulfilling his Ratzon. Al derech zeh, it's understood why the Avodah of Kabbalah Soil has intrinsic value. Although Hamshachas HaAtzmos does not come through Kabbalah Soil, Hamshachas HaAtzmos comes specifically through the fulfillment of mitzvahs, but in order for the Hamshachas to be Begilui, we need Kabbalah Soil. And that's the only way for the Hamshachas to be Begilui. For the Hamshacha, for this connection with Atzmos to be revealed and apparent in your life, you need Kabbalah Soil. So it's very understood why we need Torah mitzvahs b'peil mamish, the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs b'peil mamish. It's very understood why we need Kabbalah Soil. We need these two ingredients for the Hamshachas, for there to be an Hamshachas HaAtzmos, and that the Hamshachas HaAtzmos should be Begilui. Ru'us Deliba, however, seems to be only there to lead us in to be an Akdama for Kabbalah Soil. In order to have Kabbalah Soil, what's going to allow me to have Kabbalah Soil is Ru'us Deliba. But the Avodah of Ru'us Deliba, the Avodah being the Eibishter's child, doesn't seem to have its own intrinsic value, based on what we've learned in Seif Dalid. However, here in Seif Hey, the Rebbe is going to introduce, and we already started at the beginning of Seif Hey, that the two Avedas of Banim and Avadim, these two relationships, the two ways how a Yid can relate to the Eibishter, either a Yid can relate to the Eibishter like a Ben, or he can relate to the Eibishter like an Eved, these two relationships are expressed or are represented in the Aveda of Limud HaTorah and Kiyum HaMitzvahs. And just to be clear, this is a very important disclaimer, when we say Kiyum HaMitzvahs, we don't mean literally the fulfillment of mitzvahs, but we mean the attitude that a person has in the fulfillment of mitzvahs. We don't mean the literal physical fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. We mean the approach that a person has, the hergish ha'adam, the way a person feels when he fulfills Torah mitzvahs. So again, learning Torah and fulfillment of mitzvahs, or the hergish that a person has in the fulfillment of mitzvahs, represent the avodah of banim and avadim, of ben and eved. And once we say that, once Rebbe introduces this concept of hey, it's very clear that the avodah of being a ben is no longer a technical thing. Because Limud HaTorah is not a hakdama for anything. Limud HaTorah is, if a person wants to describe, if a person wants to divide Avodas Hashem into two categories, if you want to summarize Avodas Hashem is Kiyum HaMitzvahs and Limud HaTorah. Limud HaTorah is not a technical thing. It's not a hakdama to something else. It's an independent Avodah. It's an Avodah in and of itself. So when the Rebbe here in Seif Hey introduces that the Banim and Avadim, which until now in Seif Dalid, Banim and Avadim was represented in Ru'us Deliba and Kabbalah Soil, the Rebbe here in Seif Hey says that the Avodah of Banim and Avadim is connected with Limud HaTorah and Kiyum HaMitzvahs. So the first thing that we see is that the Rebbe is giving a whole new chashivos to the Avodah of Banim. Until now, the Avodah of Banim, of being a ben, of Ru'us Deliba and Seif Dalid, didn't have such an importance. The whole Ru'us Deliba was only a hakdam, an introduction to Kabbalah Soil. And now we're already seeing a new concept being introduced over here in Seif Hey, that being a ben to the Eibishter is what Torah is all about. Learning Torah, which is obviously a very important idea. Limud HaTorah is half of Yiddishkeit, you could say. Limud HaTorah is is something that highlights and brings out the Avodah of being a ben to the Eibishter. Now, what taka does it mean that the Avodah, these two relationships of Banim and Avadim, are represented in Limud Torah and Kiyum Mitzvahs? So we started learning this in Seif. The Rebbe said in Seif, what is taka the difference between being a ben or an eved? An eved means that you're mevatl your metzias, you put your metzias on the side in order to fulfill the ratz and the desire of your master. That's what an eved is. That's simple. An eved means the eved is putting himself on the side, ignoring his metzias. What's a ben? Says the Rebbe, a ben means that your metzias is in sync and aligned with the metzias of your father, with the metzias of the father. The seichel and the ratzon of the child, of the ben, is aligned and is in sync with the seichel and the ratzon of his father. So in other words, the two ways of serving the Eibishter are two totally different ways, two opposite approaches of how he is going to serve the Eibishter. Serving the Eibishter as an eved means that you're getting rid of your metzias. That's your way of serving Hashem. How am I going to serve Hashem? By ignoring my metzias. A ben means a whole different way of serving Hashem. How am I going to serve Hashem? By making sure that my metzias is in line and in sync with the Eibishter. These are the two relationships that a Yid can have the Eibishter, two opposite approaches that a Yid can have in serving Hashem. Putting his metzias on the side, getting rid of his metzias, or making sure that his metzias is aligned with the Eibishter. How are these two relationships represented? How do we see these two relationships in Limud Torah and Kiyum Mitzvahs? So that we still have to read inside. We're holding 6 lines from the top of Seif by the words the Kiyum Mitzvahs. Right now, that was going to go on to explain how do we see that these two relationships of Ben and Eved are displayed in the Avodah of Kiyum Mitzvahs and Limud Torah. Says the Rebbe inside, the Kiyum Mitzvahs, Shekiyum Mitzvahs ulekayim tzivei Hashem. B'derech Kabbalah Sel, Miskale ha'eved shabay. When a Yid fulfills mitzvahs, what's an approach that Yid's meant to have when he fulfills mitzvahs? That why is he doing the mitzvah? He's doing the mitzvah to fulfill Hashem's ratzin. So when a Yid fulfills mitzvahs, that brings out how he's an eved to the Eibishter. Because the approach that's expected from a Yid when he does the mitzvah, a Yid is meant to do the mitzvah. He does the mitzvahs because that's what Hashem commanded him to do. So in the Kiyum mitzvahs, which relationship is this gala, the relationship of the fact that Yidden are avadim to the Eibishter, the fact that Yidden are Hashem's eved. That's in Kiyum mitzvahs. Ubelim Torah, shetzrich lis ba'avan v'asaga davka, shaseichel shel ha'adam ha'oisik b'Torah yibehasim l'chachma shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu misgala ha'ben shabay. Says the Rebbe, what's limud Torah? What does Torah mean? Torah means that a Yid has to understand the chachma of the Eibishter using his seichel. Meaning, a Yid has to make sure that his seichel, his wisdom, his intellect is aligned with the seichel of the Eibishter. In other words, when a Yid learns Torah, he reveals how he's the Eibishter's child. That's a relationship of banim amakim. Why? Because just like a child, his intellect is in sync and aligned with the seichel of his father. So when a Yid learns Torah, what's he exercising? What's he accomplishing? He's accomplishing that his seichel should be aligned with the seichel of the Eibishter. Says the Rebbe wants to be meisif. The Rebbe wants to explain a little bit more in depth. Where do we find another place where we find the concept of Ben, the relationship of Ben, being expressed in Limud Torah? Says the Rebbe, let's see inside. If we can add the gam zesh apsak din da adam ha'isik v'Torah. Tzarich li is kviya v'nasi da adam the Torah lebeshamayimi hu mitzad in a ben sheb Yisrael ukemaim razal kuchabrich ukachayich v'amar netzchuni bonai netzchuni da tam al zesh netzchuni ulefi sheim bonai. Says the Rebbe, there's two ideas that we learned about in this Maimer with regards to Limud Torah. One is that Torah is all about your understanding. A person has to make sure that he understands Torah. A person can't be makabel the Torah with Kabbalah Sel. Torah is all about making sure that your seichel, your intellect understands the Torah. The Torah makes sense in your head. That's one idea. Then there's another concept that we learned about in Sif Beis. And that is that not only do you have to try to understand Torah, but the Psak Halacha, how are you going to rule if a person has one way of understanding Torah, but his friend has another way of understanding? Or a baskel, a heavenly voice comes out and says, you're learning the Torah wrong. How's that? What's the halacha going to be? What's going to be the final verdict? How does the person have to paskin? A way a person has to paskin is the way he understood the Torah. That's the way Torah works. That's the system. That's the rule of halacha. The way halacha works is that the psak din, the final verdict, always goes according to your understanding. And even if a baskel comes out, like we found the story, like we mentioned the story in the Gemara in Seif Beis, that even if a baskel, even if a heavenly voice comes out and says you're understanding wrong, it doesn't matter. We don't listen to the baskel. Torah le b'shamayim. And therefore, we're going to pass in halacha the way the human being understood the Torah. So says the Rebbe, this idea is also a result of the fact that Yidden are the Eibushar's children, of being banim lamakim. Why is this? How is this idea connected to banim? So first of all, the Rebbe says, proves it from the Gemara itself. The Gemara says, when there was the argument between the Chachamim and the Baskel, between Rabbah and the Eibusher, so the Baskel said, Netzchuni banai netzchuni. The Baskel used the lashon netzchuni banai, meaning to say, why was it that Rabbah was able to be correct over the Eibusher? What made that a Yid? What allows that a Yid could have a victory, so to speak, in a debate with the Eibusher? What allows for a Yid to have this victory, this nitzachin, is banai, the fact that we are the Eibusher's children. Now, what does this mean? What does it mean that because we're the Eibusher's children, that's why we have the ability to be victorious, so to speak, that the halacha should go after our seichel, that we understand Torah? So says the Rebbe, V'hainu, what's the explanation for this? V'hainu, ki sheirish haben, hu ba'atzmu sa'av, shalamayim l'kech sa'giluyim shalai. Says the Rebbe, a child comes from the very essence of his father, which is beyond the father's keches ha'giluyim, beyond the father's revealed keches. Let's take just a minute to explain what this means. The Rebbe uses this idea to explain why we go after a Yid's understanding in Torah. The fact that a ben is what allows for a Yid to be victorious over the Eibusher. The Rebbe explains this idea in other places, a little bit more at length. Here it's bekitzer. So we'll just explain the very, very basic concept over here. We know the saying, Yofa koyach haben mi koyach ha'av. Sometimes you can have a child. The child is smarter or more talented than his father. Yosef the child can have greater capabilities than the father. And seemingly Chassidus asks that how could this be? If the whole mitzias of the child comes from the father, how could it be that the child should have greater keches, greater intellect, or greater talents than the father? The child's whole identity, his whole mitzias was taken from the father. So it's Mavor and Chassidus that the truth is, the way to read this statement properly is Yosef koyach ben mi koyach ha'av. Not only can the child's capabilities be greater than the father's, but the greatness, the fact that the child has such great capabilities, such great intellect, such great talents, is mi koyach ha'av. It comes from the father himself. What does this mean? What does it mean? The father, let's say you have a father that's not so smart, or doesn't have such great talents, or has certain imperfections, and the child is much greater than the father. So what does it mean that the child's talents come from the father? The father doesn't have these talents. So it's Mavor Chassidus that there's the etzem of the father and there's the giluyim of the father. There's the very essence of the father, and then there is the so to speak, the more conscious, the conscious or the revealed keches of the father. And a child comes from the essence of the father. And a father in his essence could have many capabilities, many talents. He could have, let's say, for example, his seichel could exist within his very essence in a very essential state that was never revealed. It never came to fruition. His seichel is never fully expressed, never fully developed. But in his essence, in his etzem, he has this potential for this seichel. Or that's with regard to seichel. Al derech zeh can be said with regard to other talents and other keiches, other chushim. A father, in his very essence, could be filled with great keiches, great talents, etc. But they stayed in their essential state. They never came out. They never came from koyach to poyel. They stayed in the etzem. However, a child doesn't come from the father's giluyim. The child, when we say a child comes from his father, it means to say that a child comes from the very essence of his father. So being that a child comes from the very essence of his father, so therefore it's possible for the child to inherit the keiches, the seichel, or the chushim, or the talents that exist in the father's very essence. And that's why it's possible that sometimes we see a child that's smarter than his father, or we see a child that has certain capabilities that the father doesn't have. Why is this? Because Yosef ben mi koyach. Where does the greatness of the child come from? From the very fact that the child comes from the essence of the father. And therefore the child is able to inherit the potentials and the great capabilities that the father has within his very essence. So al derech zeh can be said with regards to Yid and the Eibishter. Let's see inside how the Rebbe is going to teach this ace with regards to Yid and the Eibishter. Says the Rebbe, al derech zeh b'Yisrael, bon of Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sheshar shabu batzmusi yizbarech, l'mayla k'may shetzimtzim es atzur ter kutcha brichu, v'lachein hem yoidim masigim, amitis atayda, k'may shimush reshes ba'atzmus, shelamaylam darech atayda, k'may shinim sheches b'dias kutcha brichu. Says the Rebbe, Yidden are the Eibishter's children. What does it mean that the Eibishter's children? We come from the essence of the Eibishter. The Metzias of a Yid is taken from the very essence of the Eibishter. So, says the Rebbe, Kutcha Brichu, when the Gemara says that there was an argument with Kutcha Brichu, so Kutcha Brichu represents the Giluyim of the Eibishter. Kutcha Brichu doesn't represent the very essence of the Eibishter. Kutcha Brichu is a title. A title means we're not talking about the very essence of the Eibishter. Kutcha Brichu is the way the Eibishter was mitzam to himself to a certain extent. It represents the Giluyim, just like we had by the Father. There's the very essence of the Father, and then there are the Keiches HaGiluyim of the Father. There's the revealed Keiches of the Father. So to the Eibishter, there's Atzmus, the very essence of the Eibishter, and there's Kutcha Brichu, which represents what we call Giluyim, or let's just say Seder Shtalshlus, to keep things simple. So that's Kutcha Brichu. A Yid, the Sheirish of a Yid is an Atzmus. So therefore, a Yid's understanding of Torah could be greater than the understanding of Kutcha Brichu. A Yid's understanding of Torah could be greater than the way Torah is perceived in the level called Kutcha Brichu. Being that a Yid is the Eibishter's ben, which means being the Eibishter's ben means that he comes from the etzem of the Father. So therefore, a Yid understands Torah the way Torah exists within Atzmus. So a Yid's understanding, so again, from what we see from this idea is that it's the fact that a Yid's a ben, the fact that a Yid's a child to the Eibishter, that's what gives a Yid the ability to have a greater understanding in Torah, greater than the understanding of Kutcha Brichu. Just like a child inherits the etzem of the father, just like a child has the ability to tap into the very essence of the keiches, the seichel, the midis, the chushim, the talents that exist in the etzem of the father, because the child comes from the very essence of the father. So to a Yid has the ability to understand Torah the way it exists in Atzmos, being that a Yid is a child, the Eibishter's child, and he comes from the Sheirish of Yid, is from the very essence of the Eibishter. This is all to explain why it is that we follow the halacha the way a Yid understands. Why do we follow halacha? Why does the psak din, why does the final verdict go based on the Yid's understanding and not by the baskel? Why is it like this? Because a Yid is natzchuni bone natzchuni. Because a Yid is the Eibishter's child. And being that he is the Eibishter's child, that means he comes from the essence of the Eibishter. And being that he comes from the essence of the Eibishter, he has the ultimate understanding of Torah the way it exists in Atzmos. What do we see from all this? What we see from all of this is that the avoid of limda Torah, learning Torah, is completely connected with the idea of being the Eibishter's child, being banim lamakim. Number one, we learn Torah in order to make sure that our seichel is in sync, that our metzias is aligned with the metzias of the Eibishter. That's why we learn Torah. Just like a child, his seichel is in sync and aligned with the seichel of his father, so to a Yid learns Torah to make sure that his metzias is aligned and in sync with the metzias with the Eibishter. That's number one. And number two, why does the psak din, why does the final verdict go based on the seichel of the Yid? That is because the Yid is a child to the Eibishter. Being that he is the Eibishter's child, which means he comes from the essence of the Eibishter, so a Yid has the ultimate understanding of Torah. From all this we see that when a Yid learns Torah, it brings out how he's the Eibishter's child. What do we get from all this? What do we see? We just finished Seif. What do we see from Seif? One of the big ideas that we see in Seif is that the Aveda of Ru'us Daliba, the Aveda of being a Ben, is not a technical Aveda. It's not an Aveda that's only Akdama to something else. Just like we understood from Sif Dalet, that the fulfillment of mitzvahs is very important in order for there to be Amshachas Atzmos. And just like we understood in Sif Dalet, that the Aveda of Kabbalah Soil is extremely important in order for the Amshachah to be Begilui. So now we understand that the Aveda of being a Ben, exercising this relationship revealing the fact that a Yid's a Ben is also very important. It's an Avodah for itself. It's the Avodah of Limdat Torah. It's the Avodah of making sure that your Metzias is aligned with the Metzias of the Eibishter. This is an Avodah in it for itself, an important Avodah. And we'll see soon in the next Sif and Sif Vav how this plays a role in the whole concept of Hamshachas Atzmos and Gilui Atzmos. Right now in Sif Hey, we don't see how this plays a role. We don't see it. But what we do see in Sif Hey is that the Avodah of a Ben is not a technical Avodah, but rather it has a whole meaning for itself. Being the Eibishter's child means not ignoring your Metzias, not putting your Metzias on the side, but making sure that your Metzias is aligned with the Metzias of the Eibishter. That's what being a Ben to the Eibishter means. That's what we got from Sif Hey. And this Avodah of being a Ben is this relationship of being the Eibishter's child is nizgala and is expressed in the Avodah of Limud HaTorah. That's what we got from Sif Hey. Now we're going to move on in Sif Vav. First of all, in Sif Vav, the Rebbe is going to connect all of this that we're learning in Sif Daled and Hey back to the Gemara of Tachlis Chachma Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. But also in Sif Vav, we're going to come to seeing how the Rebbe is going to, it's going to be very clear in Sif Vav, how the Rebbe is going to highlight that Re'us Deliba and the Aveda of being a Ben is not only a technical Aveda, but the Aveda of being a Ben and the Aveda of Re'us Deliba or the Aveda of Limdat Torah is something that's also very relevant to the sugya of Hamshachas Atzmos and Gilui Atzmos. And that is the Hemshech and Yarm that's going on in Sif Daled Hey and Vav. In Sif Daled, the main thing that I've introduced was there's a concept called Hamshachas Atzmos and Gilui Atzmos. Hamshachas Atzmos comes through the fulfillment of mitzvahs with Peil Mamish, and Gilui Galas Atzmos comes through Kabbalah Sol. That's the main thing that I've introduced in Sif Daled. Re'us Deliba was only a Kedama to Kabbalah Sol. If a Yid has Avash al Pitam Vadas, he's never going to reach Kabbalah Sol. If a Yid has Re'us Deliba, his Re'us Deliba can allow him to come to Kabbalah Sol. So, but again, the main idea that was introduced in Sif Daled was the son called Hamshachas Atzmos and his Galas Atzmos. In Sif Hey, the Rebbe introduces that the Aveda of Re'us Deliba, which in general represents the Aveda of being a Ben to the Eibishter, that relationship of being a Ben is an Aveda in and of itself. It's represented in Limud HaTorah. It's the concept that Yid wants to make sure his Metzias is in sync and aligned with the Eibishter. That's the Aveda of being the relationship of a Ben is an important Aveda in and of itself. It's another kav. One way of serving the Eibishter is putting your Metzias on the side. Then there's another Aveda of making sure your entire Metzias isn't left behind, but your entire Metzias is in sync with the Eibishter. And in Sif Vav, the Rebbe is going to show us how this Aveda of Re'us Deliba, or the Aveda of being a Ben, also plays a great role in the sugya of Hamshachas Atzmos and its Galas Atzmos, which was introduced in Sif Daled. Now, before we read Sif Vav inside, I just need to make a very, very important disclaimer. And that is that I just mentioned that in Sif Vav, the Rebbe is going to connect everything we've been learning until now in Sifim Daled Hey and Vav to the Gemara, to the statement in the Gemara of Rava of Tachas Chachma Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. Now, this is a very important very important disclaimer to point out that doesn't mean to say that the Rebbe is going to explain our question that we had in Sif Aleph and Beis. In Sif Aleph and Beis, we asked a question on the statement of Rava. The question was, what does it mean that the Iker of Torah is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim? What does it mean that the essence of Torah is that it should be accompanied by Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim? That was our question in Sif Aleph and Beis. The Rebbe is not going to be answering that question in Sif Vav. That the Rebbe is going to be answering that question in Sifim Zayin and Ches. All I was saying is that the Rebbe is going to connect everything we've been learning till now with the words, with the terminology used in the statement of Rava. But that doesn't mean the Rebbe is going to be using everything we learned until now to answer the questions we had in Sif Aleph and Beis. So I think that's just a very important disclaimer to put out there before we read weiter in Sif Vav. That being said, let's go a little weiter in Sif Vav. והנה נוסיף לשני העניינים דבן ועבד יש עוד עניין בעבודת האדם קיים המצוות וכמו שנסבר לאל סif ד' דבקיים המצווה שני עניינים הביטול דקבלת אל שבקיים המצווה וקיים המצווה עצמה. Says the Rebbe, until now in Sif Hey we spoke about two avedas. There's the aveda of Limud Torah and the aveda of kiyum mitzvahs. But as we already pointed out when we learned Sif Hey that when the Rebbe says that the Aveda of Limdat Torah and Kiyum HaMitzvahs is connected to Ben and Eved, we're not referring to the literal fulfillment of mitzvahs. We are referring to the attitude and the Hergish Adam, the way a person feels a Yid's approach to the fulfillment of mitzvahs. But the Rebbe is not talking about the actual fulfillment, the actual kiyum of mitzvahs. Again, we're just talking about the hergish ha'adam. We're talking about the person's attitude in the fulfillment of mitzvahs. Says the Rebbe, so that's Seif. Seif talks about two avedas, the aved of limnat Torah and the aved of kiyum mitzvahs, not the fulfillment of kiyum mitzvahs, but the hergish ha'adam in kiyum mitzvahs. Says the Rebbe, there's a third aveda that we already mentioned in Sif Dalid, and that is the actual fulfillment of mitzvahs. So says the Rebbe, weiter in Sivav, v'ikir ha'inyan dam shachas atzmos, hu ha'ide kiyum mitzvah atzma, ratzon atzmos. Ela shebechtei sham shachas ha'atzma shebekiyum mitzvah tia begilui, hu k'shkiyum mitzvah hibdach kabbalas el evet. V'ashlei mus de inyan zeh. Shekiyum mitzvah su bli shum mevukesh rak l'kayim ritzenis barich b'derech kabbalas el, hu ha'ide k'dimas is eidos ha'ava atzmis ruos liba ben. Says the Rebbe, what is the most important aveda when it comes to discussing the sugya of atzmos? When it comes to discussing the sugya of being mamshech and connecting yourself to atzmos, which one of the three avedas? We have Ben, Evan, and the fulfillment of mitzvahs. Which one of the three avedas is most important, is most relevant? The fulfillment of mitzvahs. The only way to connect to atzmos is by fulfilling his ratzon, fulfilling the ratzon of atzmos. However, why do I need kabbalas el in order for the hamshach to be begili? If I want the hamshachas atzmos, if I want that connection to atzmos to be begili, to be revealed, that I should be conscious of that connection, so I need to fulfill the mitzvahs in a way, mitech kabbalas el. I need to do the mitzvah, not because I have a ratzon to do the mitzvah, but I need to do the mitzvah just because it's the ratzon of Hashem, ratzon atzmos. So what enables hamshach to be begili is when I fulfill the mitzvah with that kabbalas el. And now the Rebbe throws in a line that we haven't seen until now. Says the Rebbe, here's the chiddush of Sivav, v'ashleimus, the shleimus of kabbalas el is when I also have the aveda of ru'us deliba, the aveda of ben. Like we mentioned many times already in this year. In Sif Dalid, the Rebbe never clearly said that ru'us deliba completes or is necessary for the bittul kabbalas el. All we said in Sif Dalid is that ru'us deliba allows for there to be the aveda kabbalas el. It's a hakdama and achana. If a yid has ava shal pitam v'das, so the ava shal pitam v'das, the intellectual ava will prevent a yid from coming to kabbalas el. That's what we said in Sif Dalid. Ru'us deliba will not prevent a yid from coming to kabbalas el. Ru'us deliba will allow a yid to come to kabbalas el. But we never said that ru'us deliba completes kabbalas el. Here the Rebbe is saying Tzivav that the shleimus of kabbalas el is when it's accompanied by or when it's preceded by the aveda ru'us deliba, the aveda of ben. And that's the chiddush that was the right over here. Now, what does this mean? Before we explain what it means, that the shleimus, the completion, or the ultimate bit of kabbalas el is through ru'us deliba, before we explain what that means, let's just understand what's going to be a result of that statement. What does that tell us? What that tells us is the following. Hamshachas atzmos comes through fulfillment of mitzvahs. We said that already 100 times. His galus, the fact, the what enables that the hamshachas be begilui is kabbalas el. But if we're saying that kabbalas el is incomplete without ru'us deliba, that obviously means that the bittul is incomplete, which means that the gilui, this galus atzmos, the gilui of hamshachas atzmos is also incomplete. Because think about it. If what allows for the hamshach to be begili is kabbalas el, but our kabbalas el is incomplete without ru'us deliba, so that means that this galus atzmos is incomplete without ru'us deliba. Which by the Rebbe saying this over here in Sivav, what happens is now we should have the complete understanding in the Zohar that says nitvas ir ru'us deliba. The Rebbe brought in the beginning of Sif Daled and Sif Gimel already that it says in the Zohar nitvas ir ru'us deliba. However, the Frierdiker Rebbe explained, and the Rebbe explained that length in Sivav, that we don't actually mean that ru'us deliba is teifas and atzmos. How is it teifas and atzmos? How does he connect himself to atzmos? Is through mitzvahs, is through fulfilling the mitzvahs. That's how the hamshacha comes about. How does the gilui come about? Through kabbalas el. So what role does ru'us deliba play in nitvas ir ru'us deliba? What role does ru'us deliba play in being teifas atzmos? So in Sif Daled, we just said it's a hakdama. It allows you to come to kabbalas el. Here the Rebbe is saying a whole new concept. What role does ru'us deliba play in being teifas atzmos? It plays a major role. Because the ultimate tefis and atzmos, what does it really mean to grasp atzmos? That the hamshacha should be begilui. It shouldn't stay behelim. It shouldn't be concealed. It shouldn't be something that we're unaware of. The ultimate concept, the ultimate idea of being teifas atzmos means that a yid connects to atzmos, and the connection should be apparent and revealed in his life. That's what it means to be teifas and atzmos. And for that to happen, you need to first of all fulfill the mitzvahs, but do them in teich bittul, in teich kabbalas el. And now the Rebbe is saying, but how do you have a complete bittul? How does Yid come to complete Kabbalah Soil? It's specifically when his Kabbalah Soil is preceded by the Aveda of Ruz the Liba, the Aveda, the relationship of being a Ben. Before we discuss briefly what that means, let's just continue reading inside in Sivav. Let's finish Sivav, and then we'll give a few minutes to explain what does that mean that the completion of Kabbalah Soil is specifically when it's preceded by Ruz the Liba. Let's see the second paragraph of Sivav inside. V'yishleimer, says the Rebbe, the Gimel Yonim Eile, Heim Gimel Yonim, the Chachma Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. Says the Rebbe, we just discussed in Sif and Vav 3 Avedas. There's the Aveda of Ruz the Liba, which is the relationship of Ben. There's the Aveda of Kabbalah Soil, which is the relationship of Evet. And then there is the literal fulfillment of Kiyam Teira Mitzvahs. Says the Rebbe, these 3 Avedas are alluded to in the statement of Rava, that Rava says, there's the Tachlis Chachma Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. Where do we find the 3 Avedas that we discussed in Sifei and Vav alluded to in the statement of Rava? Says the Rebbe, Chachma, Teira, in Ben Kanal Sifei. Says the Rebbe, the first thing Rava says is Chachma. What's Chachma? Teira. Like Rashi says, Chachma is Teira. And Teira, like we just learned in Sifei, is an expression of a Yid serving the Eibishter like a Ben. That the Yid wants to make sure that his Seichel should be masim, should be aligned with the Seichel of the Eibishter. So that's Chachma. Chachma is the Aveda of being a Ben, the relationship of being a Ben to the Eibishter. Tshuva, Shen Yanu Sha'adam Yetum is Batam Tziyusei Kenasiv Beis, who al derech in the Kabbalah Soil Eved. What's Tshuva? We said in Sif Beis, Tshuva represents Bittul, Asura Mikan. The whole idea of tshuva is that a person has to get rid of his old identity. A person had an identity that he was Peirik Earl, he was going against the Eibishter, he was ready to be Lavar Ritzayin, he was ready to do Averis. And a person, the whole idea of tshuva is to go away from your old identity and to regain, to get a new identity, a new Metzias. So the whole idea of tshuva represents, it's a notion of bittul. So therefore tshuva represents the idea of Kabbalah Soil, which Kabbalah Soil is an expression of a Yid being an Evet to the Eibishter. That a Yid's ready to be mevatel himself. A Yid is ready to ignore his Metzias and put his Metzias on the side. So tshuva is connected with the Aveda Kabbalah Soil, being an Evet. So it says, Tachlis, Chachma, Shuva, Ma'asim Tevim. So in that statement, the statement of Rava incorporates within itself all 3 Avedas. Chachma is the relationship that a person is expressing the fact that he's a Ben to the Eibishter. Shuva is when a Yid is expressing the fact that he's an Evet to the Eibishter, the Aveda of Kabbalah Soil, that he's bought to the Eibishter. And Ma'asim Tevim is the literal fulfillment of Torah and Mitzvahs. So says the Rebbe, ויש לו קשר זה עם פירוש הידוע בלושן תשובה ומעשים טובים שעל ידי התשובה נעשים המעשים, מעשי המצוות, מעשים טובים מאירים. Says the Rebbe, based on this that we're saying, that the statement of Rava includes in itself all 3 Avedas, Chachma, Tshuva, Ma'asim Tovim. Chachma and Tshuva represents Ben and Evet. Ma'asim Tovim refers to the actual fulfillment of mitzvahs. So says the Rebbe, based on everything we've learned until now in Sifim Dalet in the beginning of Vav, we could connect everything we've learned until now with this that Rava uses the terminology Ma'asim Tovim. The Rebbe brings, there's a Pirush in Chassidus that's brought many times in the Likutei Sichos, that what does it mean Ma'asim Tovim? Ma'aseh Bechlal refers to Ma'aseh mitzvahs. So what does it mean Ma'asim Tovim? So the Rebbe learns, Chassidus teaches us that there could be 2 types of mitzvahs. There could be Ma'asim that are Tovim or Ma'asim that aren't Tovim. There could be mitzvahs that are Tovim and mitzvahs that are not Tovim. Every time you do a mitzvah, you're Mamshech Atzmos. However, we want that the Hamshachas Atzmos should be Begili, like we've been learning until now. So when a Yid does a mitzvah, he's being Mamshech Atzmos. There's no question about it. But not necessarily is this Ma'asim going to be Ma'asim Tovim. Not necessarily will the Hamshachas Atzmos be revealed. They won't be Me'irim. It won't be expressed. What's Ma'asim Tovim? Ma'asim Tovim means not only did he do the mitzvah, but the Hamshachas Atzmos is Begili. That's what it means, Ma'asim Tovim. So says the Rebbe, we could connect everything that we've learned until now in Sif Dalet and Vav to the fact that Rava uses the Lashon Ma'asim Tovim. Why, says the Rebbe? Damshachos ha'atzmos, he be'ikar b'kiyum ha'mitzvos Ma'asim, v'lo yibabil t'tshuva Kabbalah Soil. Elo, shebechtei sha'ma'aseh yiyu Ma'asim Tovim u'me'irim, sh'hamshachos ha'atzmos shehem tiyeh begilu yadei bitul t'tshuva Kabbalah Soil. Says the Rebbe, like we've been learning until now, every time you do a mitzvah, you're Mamshech Atzmos. Ru'us the Liba, or Kabbalah Soil, the Aveda of Ben, the relationship of Ben, the relationship of Eved, that's all not Mamshech Atzmos. You can't be Mamshech Atzmos with these Avedas. We're only Mamshech Atzmos through the fulfillment of mitzvahs. But in order for the fulfillment of mitzvahs, in order for the Hamshachas Atzmos to be begilui, for that we need that the mitzvah should be done with Kabbalah Soil. In other words, tshuva. Tshuva, we just said, tshuva represents the Aveda Kabbalah Soil. Tshuva represents a certain Aveda of bittul. How does the Yid make sure that his maise will be maisim tevim? How does he make sure that is hamshachas atzmos will be begilui? That is specifically if the maisim tevim will be preceded by tshuva, by the aveda of bittul by kabbalah. So that's why Rava uses the wording maisim tevim. Now there's many places in Chazal. We find it in Pirkei Avos, for example. Yafa sha'achas b'tshuva maisim tevim. Why do we specifically use this terminology of maisim tevim together with tshuva? Because what makes sure that your maisa, what makes sure that your hamshachas ha'atzmos will be tevim, will be meirim? How do we ensure that the hamshachas ha'atzmos will be begili, specifically as preceded by tshuva? And not only that, let's just add, like the Rebbe just taught us in the beginning of Sivav, and based on that's really the point that Rebbe is trying to get to in Sifim Dal and Vav, that not only does the Maisa and Mitzvahs need to be preceded by Tshuva, by Kabbalah Soil, but in order to have the Shleimus of Kabbalah Soil, in order to have the Shleimus of Bittul, your Maisa and Mitzvahs, your Kabbalah Soil needs to be preceded by Ru'us Deliba, by the Aveda, by the relationship of being a Ben to the Eibishter. And that is pretty much, if you want to summarize what came out of Sifim Dalad and Vav. The Rebbe took us on a long journey over here in Sifim Dalad and Vav, discussing the Maimer HaZayar of Leis Machshava Tvisa Bach Klal Aval Nitvas Yibros Deliba. And the Rebbe discussed at length Avida Ben and Evet. What's the Nakuda? If you want to summarize, what's the point that came out of this entire journey? There's two Nakudas. The first idea that we learned from all of this is that although there's two ways of serving the Eibishter, you can serve the Eibishter like a Ben, or you can serve the Eibishter like an Evet. You can serve the Eibishter through learning Torah or through Kabbalah Soil. But none of these are Mamshech Atzmos. What's Mamshech Atzmos is the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. Kiyum Torah mitzvahs. That's what's Mamshech Atzmos. That's one thing we've gained, we've learned from these Sifim. But another thing we learned is that we want the Hamshach to be Begilui. And in order for the Hamshach to be Begilui, in order for the Maisim to be Maisim Tovim, so you have to have Chochma and Tshuva. You have to have both the Aveda of the relationship of Ben and the relationship of Eved. Both the Aveda of Rus Deliba and the Aveda of Kabbalah Soil. Because the goal is to be Teifis and Atzmos. And in order to be Teifis and Atzmos, in order that you shouldn't just have a connection, there shouldn't just be Hamshachas Atzmos, but there should be a proper Tfisa on Atzmos, that you each have a real, true connection to Atzmos, we want the Hamshach to be Begili. And that is specifically when your mitzvahs are preceded by Aleph, Kabbalah Soil, Bittul, you do the mitzvahs not because you want to do the mitzvahs, but because you're Hashem's servant and Hashem wants you to do the mitzvahs. But how do we ensure that our bittul is complete when our bittul of Kabbalah Soil is preceded by Rus Deliba, by the relationship of being a Ben to the Eibishter? Now, let's just take 2 minutes to explain what does this mean. What does it mean that the shleimus of Rus Deliba, the shleimus of Kabbalah Soil, is when you have bittul? The truth is that this idea is one of the chidushim of the Maimer. It's not, the concept could be found, you could say it's found in other places in Chassidus, but it's definitely a chiddush. It's definitely a point that Rebbe is trying to make here in these sifim of the Maimer. And the truth is, we could discuss it at length, and it's probably going to be discussed in the Ion Shiurim. Just to make a mention of one basic idea, one simple point, why Kabbalah Soil needs to be preceded by Rus Deliba. Technically speaking, a Yid can have Kabbalah Soil without Rus Deliba. A Yid has the koyach, a Yid has the ability to reveal that he is an Evet to the Eibishter. Every Yid, mitzad neshama, he is an Evet to the Eibishter. Every Yid has the ability to bring out within himself, to be makabel malchus shamayim. Even without arousing or without awakening within inside ourselves, the ava atzmis of Rus Deliba. However, what's the issue if a Yid will only reveal within himself his koyach be makabel el? What's going to be the issue if a Yid will only exercise his relationship of being an Evet to the Eibishter? The issue is the following. We know it's Chassidus, and Chassidus takes it, it's a statement it's a lashon from Chazal in the Gemara, that Avda Befker Nichali, a servant naturally does not want to do the ratzon of his master. A servant Befker Nichali, he'd much rather be free, he'd much rather be let loose and do whatever he wants. Why does a servant do what his master wants? Because he's forced to. He's makabel oil. He accepted upon himself the yoke of his master, so he has no other choice but to do what his master wants. But naturally, avda befkir nichali. So in other words, I ask you a question. When a Yid does a mitzvah, there's hamshachas atzmos. In order for the Hamshacha to be begilui, a Yid needs to do the mitzvah mitich bittul. Granted, that's true. But if the Yid is doing mitich bittul, but he finds himself in a situation of avda befker nichali, is the Hamshachas Atzmos really begilui? Well, on the one hand, you can say, yes, in a general sense, this Yid knows that he's doing the mitzvah only because of the Ratzon Atzmos. He's only doing the mitzvah because this is Hashem's Ratzon. So you could say the Hamshachas begilui. Hamshachas Atzmos, this connection, this relationship to Atzmos, is something that's revealed and expressed and felt in the Yid's life. But on the other hand, there's a whole part of the Yid that befker nichali. There's an entire part of the Yid, there's his whole identity, his whole mitzvah, his whole personality is befker nichali. A eved, a natural, regular eved, when you just have Kabbalah Soil, means that your identity, your mitzvah, your personality doesn't want to do what the Eibishter wants. Your identity, your personality doesn't care for the Ratzon of the Eibishter. On the contrary, befker nichali. You're only doing what the Eibishter wants because you're Mekabel. You forced yourself, you broke yourself, you put your mitzvahs on the side and decided, I have the koyach, I have the ability to ignore my mitzvahs and to make myself an eved to the Eibishter, to be Mekabel Malchus Shemayim. But what's with the rest of your mitzvahs? For this, we need to have Kabbalah Soil. Because like we learned in Sif Dalid, Ru'us Liba on its own right is not bittul. A Yid that lives with Ru'us Liba has a Ratzon. A Yid that has an Ava Atzmis, a Yid has a natural and inherent desire to the Eibishter. It's beautiful that you have this relationship of a Ben, but you're also expressing your Metzias, your Ratzon. So, on the one hand, each thing has a Chsarn. Kabbalah Soil has a Chsarn. The Chsarn of Kabbalah Soil is, at the end of the day, Avda Befker Nichali. If you're just have Kabbalah Soil, half of your Metzias, half of your identity is not involved with Hamshachas Atzmos at all. And is not experiencing the Gili of Atzmos at all. Half of your identity is actually totally removed and totally detached from this whole mitzvah experience. Ru'us Deliba is not going to help you much either. Because Ru'us Deliba means you're still Metzias. No part of you is batal. A Yid that serves Hashem like a Ben, with Ru'us Deliba, means that he wants to fulfill the Torah mitzvahs. He has a ratzon to do the Torah mitzvahs. Just like a child has a ratzon to fulfill the ratzon of his father, a child has a ratzon, he's excited, and he has a ratzon to fulfill the desire of his father. So a Yid that's living with Ru'us Deliba, he's not even batal to the Eibishter. He's doing the mitzvahs because he wants to do the mitzvahs. But if we have a tziruf of both, if we have a combination of both, a Yid that first of all has Ru'us Liba, that means that he has a ratzon atzim to the Eibishter, to be connected with the Eibishter, and to do what Hashem wants. Not because he'll gain something out of it. He just has a ratzon to, like a child has a ratzon for his father. And if this avodah Ru'us Liba will precede the Kabbalah Soil, so then the Kabbalah Soil will come to its ultimate completion. You'll have the avodah bittul Kabbalah Soil. You'll be doing the mitzvahs, not because you want, just because Hashem wants. But on the other hand, you're not going to have the chesaron of avda befker nichali. This is just the words of the beer. It's a very, very general concept I just said. I did not explain this idea at its full length, but this is food for thought, something to think about. And the rest of the idea, I'm sure, will be addressed and discussed in the Shiurim, where each person can think about it themselves and look into it. But for this year, we'll suffice with what I just said for the past few minutes. Let's now just take 2 minutes to begin Sif Zayin. Let's see where the Maimer is heading. Until now, the Rebbe's focus of the Maimer was on the Avodah of fulfilling the mitzvahs and bittul, Kabbalah Soil. The Rebbe was really showing us how important it is to fulfill the mitzvahs. Hamshachas ha'atzmos comes through the fulfillment of mitzvahs. And in order for Hamshach to be begilui, we need Kabbalah Soil. The chiddush of the Maimer was that it's not enough. Not only is it not enough to have kiyum mitzvahs is not enough, because Hamshach won't be begilui. So we need Kabbalah Soil. But even Kabbalah Soil is not enough. The shleimus of Kabbalah Soil is when it is accompanied by Ru'us Liba, by the relationship of Ben. You can't be a Yid that's only going to serve Hashem like an Eved. There's 2 tracks. You can serve Hashem like an Eved or like a Ben. Says the Rebbe, there's no 2 tracks. You can't only serve the Eibishter like an Eved. You also need to serve the Eibishter like a Ben. We need to have both. Why do we need both? Because in order for our Kabbalah Soul to be b'shleimus, like we just said, the Kabbalah Soul needs to be preceded by the Avodah Ben, by the Ru'us Liba. And then our Kabbalah Soul will be b'shleimus, and if our Kabbalah Soul will be b'shleimus, then the Gilui of the Hamshacha, this Galus HaAtzmos, will be complete. Now the Rebbe is going to go the exact opposite direction. Just like we were saying until now. That in order for the Kabbalah Soul, in order for the Bittul to be b'shleimus, there has to be a fusion between the Avodah, the relationship of Ben and Eved. Says Rebbe, so too the other way around. Let's see the beginning of Sif Zayin. V'hinei, says Rebbe, Hagam shin eisek atayda, Hu shemitzius shel adam. Havan vasagishli. Tia behasam latayda. Mikol mokim gam lim latayda. Zech lis abidu david. Oy la shel tayda. V'zeh she'amra zal she'ne dei m'she'ne pirke mei apam. L'she'ne pirke mei apam v'echad. L'fi she'bepam zu ha'yiseda. M'shane tivi v'regilusei. She'gam b'tayda. Zech lis abidu david. Says the Rebbe, now we're going to go the opposite direction. Just like we've been learning until now. That we have the relationship of Ben and Eved. And we can't suffice with the relationship of Eved with Kabbalah Sol, but we need the Avodah of Ben and Ruz Liba to be mashlim Kabbalah Sol, so too can be said the other way around. Torah represents the relationship of Ben, like we learned in Seif. Torah is all about learning the Chachma de Eibishter, making sure that your mitzias, your personality, your understanding, your Avodah Vasaga is aligned with the Seichel of the Eibishter. That's the Avodah of Limdat Torah, which is basically an expression of being the Eibishter's child. So says the Rebbe, the truth is, Torah itself needs the Avodah of Kabbalah Sol, the Avodah of Bittul, in order to come to the completion of Torah, in order to come to the completion of the Avodah of Ben, we need Bittul. And like Chazal say, Ein Edema, if you have a person that learns Chazars a certain sugya 100 times, it cannot be compared to someone that Chazars 101 times. What's the difference? Back in the day, the natural order of things, it was normal for a person to learn one sugya, to do Chazara 100 times, to review one sugya 100 times. That was normal. So it says in the Gemara, but if a person learns 101 times, he is infinitely greater than a person that learns 100 times. Why? Because 101 times means that a person was mevatel his teva. The teva, the nature, by habit, people would do Chazara, would review 100 times. This person reviewed 101 times. What did he just do? He introduced bittul into his learning. If he would just go after his nature, he would only do Chazara 100 times. This Yid went ahead and he introduced bittul, Kabbalah Sol, into his learning, and that changes, that transforms his entire learning. Like we will learn in the following paragraph of Siv Zayin. But this is the idea, this is the direction the Rebbe is heading. Until now, the Rebbe was going in one direction, discussing the greatness of Kabbalah Sol, why Kabbalah Sol is so necessary, and Ben, Ruz Liba, is coming to be mashlim, is coming to complete Kabbalah Sol. Now the Rebbe goes the total opposite direction. Just like we said, that Ben, the relationship of Ben, is mashlim Eved, so too can be said all the way around. That the Kabbalah Sol, the bittul of Kabbalah Sol, the bittul of an Eved, is mashlim, the Avodah of the relationship of Ben, the Avodah of Limdat Torah. Like we'll see the beer, what exactly this means in the next paragraph of Sif Zayin in the following Shiur.